Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Sensitive Information in an API and Microservices World. I'm Joshua Norrid, Global Platform Architect with Apogee.
And I'm Peter Miron. I'm an architect at Apcera.
We'd like to extend our very special thanks to all of our worldwide attendees for spending your valuable time with us today. A few housekeeping notes. First off, all of the presentations and the content will be available after the webinar. You can find this on YouTube at youtube.com/Apogee, on SlideShare at slideshare.com.apogee, and for those of you who have additional questions or would like to seek out more knowledge around the subject matter from today, feel free to join Apogee Community. This is a very large collective of various different people from around the world who like to talk all things APIs and microservices, and it's hosted right at community.apogee.com. Also, your questions and your feedback throughout the webinar are extremely valuable to us. So we'll be covering a Q&A toward the end of this webinar, and we would like to encourage you to please place your questions in the Q&A tab within the user interface in front of you, and we'll do our very best to get all of your questions answered today. Today, we're going to be spending some time with you to talk about a unique approach to securing sensitive data in the world of APIs, platform as a service, and microservices, based on some of the partnering work that Apigee and Apcera have recently worked on together. Essentially, we're talking about how innovation can meet the importance and requirement for trust to come together in a seamless picture. As we all know, APIs are becoming more and more pervasive in today's digital economy. With billions of API calls per day flowing through the Apogee managed cloud, we've actually been extremely fortunate to witness the explosive growth and transformation of the digital space firsthand. That said, more and more of the use cases that we are beginning to encounter tend to gravitate toward the exchange of sensitive or confidential data between consumers and data providers. This is the kind of data that is sensitive for or even confidential in nature, and we see examples of it growing every single day, such as in healthcare with patient and provider records, or in banking and financial services with things like SWIFT messages and account profile information. Telecommunications has call detail record data and network utilization factors. Or energy shares information that is critical infrastructure data, such as SCADA. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it does raise the importance of having an end-to-end security approach, and it raises it to new heights when we consider the implications of a failure in security. Yet at the same time, in order for us to continue to innovate at speed and scale, we have to be able to continue to leverage the dynamic power of APIs as well as modern microservices architecture when building new systems. So why are we talking about this? It really is all about the 6 C's. Customers need convenience, and they need access to information, some of which may be sensitive. All parties desire control of sensitive data so that it can be trusted, and that it can be encrypted, and that it can be secure. All parties, both the providers as well as the consumers, need consistency of their experience and their process for dealing with sensitive data. And sensitive data providers have to be able to apply constraints to the consumption of sensitive data. The sensitive data providers have to achieve compliance for regulatory purposes as well as other. A chain of custody is essentially what our hypothesis is, a chain of custody that is required for managing sensitive information with APIs in the digital world. At Apogee, we have focused on being the world's premier API management platform for many years now. Our #1 objective is to help businesses compete digitally. We have an API management platform known as Apigee Edge that has been proven in the market with more API management deployments, over 500 to date, than any other platform in the industry. We're about a $100 million a year company. We signed a definitive agreement, as many of you are aware, to be acquired by Google in September of this year. We have an extremely experienced management team from BEA, Oracle, IBM, and Yahoo, and we are noted as an industry leader in the Forrester Wave and in the Gartner MQ.
And at Apcera, we're building a trusted application management platform that allows you to take any application, whether you've coded it in Java or Node.js, and to deploy it to any infrastructure in any cloud, whether that's your local data center or one of the many public clouds. And where Apcera really shines is around policy and enforcement of the connections and the deployment of each of those individual applications that you are deploying to your infrastructure. We focus on policy and automated enforcement for workload composition, which includes the necessary runtimes and operating systems required for your applications, scheduling and placement, which helps you decide where you're going to run those applications, resource management by setting quotas, and then finally communication and connectivity, which we'll be talking about a bit today, for exactly which containers can talk to other applications, both inside and outside of your system. All right, and I'll hand it back over to Josh.
Sure, thank you, Peter. A few months back, when Peter and I began talking about the complexity, the inherent complexity of dealing with sensitive data across the API chain, I shared this diagram with him. And essentially, this is the codified version of what we know as the digital value chain. The right-hand side of this chart basically shows the exposure side of the spectrum. The left-hand side is really all about consumption. Who uses APIs and consumes them either at the application level, where there are compelling user experiences, or at the application developer user who is consuming APIs to build the next great thing. On the right-hand side, we noted that in the back-end systems, we seem to have just a little bit of a challenge because everything is moving away from monolithic SOA and ESB infrastructure and still leveraging that SOA and ESB infrastructure all the same. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side, there's this need to place APIs on everything in order to foster a digitally interconnected world. Apogee makes it really, really easy to build APIs on both new and existing back-end technologies. And we provide an end-to-end analytic capability automatically that provides a tremendous amount of information about everything that's coming into or out of the request-response loop in an API. What was missing for us was direct visibility into the security constraints and controls and model within back-end systems, where we might have thousands upon thousands of independently deployed microservices that are dealing with managing and serving up sensitive or confidential information. Our view after talking through this was that by connecting the two systems, Apcera's ability to inject policies dynamically to govern and control security constraints on containers and actual managed microservices, as well as Apogee's ability to provide analytics across the API spectrum, we could actually get to a true chain of custody for sensitive information or confidential information of any time. And that was our working hypothesis. At Apogee, the view of policy-based approach actually comes from the Unix programming environment from many years ago, where essentially a whole bunch of small, independent, battle-tested units of code can be combined together in order to form something that is more useful than the sum of its parts. We took that as direct inspiration when constructing Apigee Edge, our API management platform, and actually provide over 30 out-of-the-box drag, drop, click, and configure policies that can be placed on the request or the response line of any API. Many of those are directly related to security, but some are also dealing in the area of traffic management or mediation, and we even provide you with the ability to extend the platform dynamically within the runtime. It kind of looks like what Julius Caesar had put together back in the Battle of Alesia. Forgive the historical reference, but it makes the point fairly clearly. Alesia was essentially this green hilltop fort at the center of this diagram, and it was surrounded by river valleys with strong defensive features. There were over 80,000 people who were extremely well armed inside, and only 3 Roman legions, which were about 10,000 people apiece, surrounding the fortress. Essentially, Julius Caesar's strategy in this particular tactical diagram was to build a moat and 4.5-meter ditches along the inner wall, which he commissioned his legions to build. Further, he concerned about outside reinforcements. He actually commissioned his legions to build an outer wall and then stationed his men on the inside. Effectively, this was the world's first example of a direct human proxy. No one was going to get into or out of this particular tactical environment without being mediated, if you will, by Roman soldiers. So it was a true physical proxy. When we fast forward to modern day, essentially when we combine Apigee and Apcera together, we see a tremendous amount of similarity in the front wall and the back wall type approach. Apogee to provide API management, and Apcera to provide all of the wonderful capabilities that it provides within container management, security, and runtime. With Apogee, We still service all of the same sets of data consumers. We have developers and partners that use APIs to build apps. They build those apps based on APIs exposed by the platform, and then users have compelling user experiences that are driven out of the usage and combination of different APIs in different flavors. Apogee as a platform out of the box provides a tremendous amount of capability in the area of API security and traffic management and mediation, as I had mentioned before. We also have the ability to call out to a multitude of different back-end systems in parallel and then aggregate a single response back to a calling consumer. I already mentioned the end-to-end analytics. What's unique about it is it provides us with very easy self-service dashboards and reports that can provide users with any type of visibility that they need end-to-end across the value chain that was previously depicted. The extensibility that we provide allows us to extend the platform with Node, Java, Python, or JavaScript, which makes it very easy for developers to use the tools that they already know and they love in order to build out custom functionality. And all of this is driven at global scale with the highest performing managed cloud capabilities in the world. Our developer portal is really designed to help extend and build your API ecosystem. So the most important aspect of a successful API program or digital venture is really about opening up your APIs and capabilities to outside partners as well as the ones inside your organization. Our developer portal does that and provides rapid self-service onboarding, documentation, forums, and almost a community-based approach where developers can very rapidly get up to speed with APIs and become productive. Many organizations have asked us over and over about the ability to monetize their APIs. In fact, Walgreens is a wonderful customer of Apogee that has done just that. Now they actually have 100 partners that are essentially paying them in order to have access to APIs that in turn drive in-store brick-and-mortar traffic at Walgreens. So we provide the monetization capabilities with Apogee Edge as well in order to open up a new revenue-generating ecosystem. For organizations that need to rapidly prototype APIs with data structures or want to do some what-if scenarios or actually need a highly scalable, automatically replicating data store that's close to the area of where API interaction takes place, we provide our backend as a service all within the platform as well. So these capabilities are fantastic for API management. But as the world is shifting more and more to a microservices-based approach, there's some additional security capabilities that Apcera brings to the table. So Peter, why don't you take us through a few of those?
Sure thing. So, as we've all seen over the last few years, many people are looking at new ways of virtualizing their application workloads. Containerization has given us the ability to start more densely packing our applications on hosts. And the Apcera platform makes it easier to both get the benefits of that dense packing, get the benefits of ease of deployment for your developers, while also ensuring the needs of your IT and operations teams around things like enhanced security. So being able to explicitly define the connections between each of those containers, being able to explicitly define which containers can send requests out of the Apcera system, as well as which containers can receive requests into the system. So we manage that through things like the Semantic Pipeline. A Semantic Pipeline allows you to view requests as they're going through a loop, very similar to what Apogee can do as it's proxying requests. And again, we make it so that you have consistent management of those containers, consistent deployment of each of those containers, regardless of what cloud you happen to be deploying to. So whether it's Google or Amazon or your internal applications, your development team, your operations team is managing each of those workloads in an identical manner. Apcera also provides the high-performance messaging system, NATS, as an open source product, and that NATS system provides a lot of the underlying foundation of the messaging between our containers. Right. So now what I'd like to do is walk through a couple of different use cases around security and how we're thinking about stitching together Apigee and Apcera. So I'm sure many of the people who are on the call today have a very similar use case to this. You've got some trusted third party, whether those are business partners or regulatory agencies, maybe they're actually legal requests, But you have this trusted third party who you need to share critical data with about your customers, about your business, or that's potentially trade secret to your organization. Those customers need to be given access to be able to request reports from you. You need to be able to generate that report and know for certain exactly who requested the data, when they made the request for that data, who else has access to that data. So is it possible for any data to be leaked? What services participate in the transaction or produce that report? So for all these reports that you're generating, you have code that has actually produced it. And you want to know exactly what services produced any particular report, as well as the policies that enable the participation in that transaction. So whether that's through an API key or OAuth token on the Apigee side, or by enabling services to connect to each other or enabling external routes or egress for services inside of the Apcera platform. And then again, we want to make sure that there is the absolute least number of other services, other processes that have access to this critical data so that we can attempt to maintain sovereignty over that data. All right. So let's look at a specific telco case. I have experience in the telecommunications world, and I'm sure there's a few other folks on the call today as well from telecom, where you have requests for things like call detail records. These call detail records are the information about which parties have called each other, when they called, and what times and how long they were on the phone for. There may be requests that come from a law enforcement agency that makes this request for these call detail records. Some of these requests may require a warrant. You may have sort of time-based keys for what can be requested over what time period. All of this information is highly sensitive, highly confidential, information that you would not want to be leaked outside of the people who rightly can access that data. So your service generates that report and then sends it back to this trusted third party. All right, so again, in telco, we've got policy around who can see which reports. We want to know who granted the access, who deployed the software, as well as when the software was deployed. And then this encompasses both IT processes as well as other business processes like legal and risk. Going through a similar finance use case, and again, this is a very similar pattern. So for client onboarding, you may have know your customer details that you need to request out of a KYC service. This KYC service may do things like get credit reports. It may go and look to ensure that this particular user is not on any bad guy lists. No money laundering risk, no terrorist finance risks. But it aggregates that information and then is able to send it back to everyone that has access to that information, from your legal risk and security teams to other banking partners, as well as any audit that may need to be done. Right, so for all financial firms, you need to be able to verify this information and oftentimes share it with other third parties. And when it gets shared with other third parties, you want to know exactly what was shared, when it was shared, as well as if there are any potential risks or leaks. Say there was a problem in the service that caused additional records to be made available to a third party. You want to be able to make sure that you know the scope of that problem and everyone that requested that specific report over a given time period. All right, and then finally, just one last example, and then we'll get into the demonstration. Healthcare use case, again, electronic medical records. You need to share these records with third party, very critical, sensitive, privacy-related data. There are regulations around what can be shared, how it can be shared. You need to make sure that you audit access to that data. So we're going to show how policy might govern access through Apigee Edge into being able to see that a developer can deploy the services that produce this data, and also demonstrate how operations can control over who has access to which data, which services has access to which data inside of the Apcera platform. And we'll also show auditability around per request traceability, as well as when the software was last modified, so that you can really start to stitch together all of the components of the system as it's running in place, as well as each individual request, see at what points it hit which services, whether that's the Apigee service or your service running in Apcera, so that you can begin to start tracing down issues and begin to start having a clear chain of custody for the provenance of your data. So now we'll switch to the demonstration. Okay. So what you'll all be seeing here in a second. This is the screen of our Apcera Platform Enterprise Edition. There are two major users that we're targeting for this platform, for this UI. The first that I'll talk through is the developer. Your developer needs to be able to deploy, needs to be able to see what's running, needs to be able to see what other components, the services that they're deploying can talk to. Your IT operations team will need to go and manage the cluster, make sure there's sufficient space, disk, RAM for each of the instances that are running. They may also do things like set up new instances in different clouds and be able to tag which instances are running in different clouds, so that when developers run deployments, they can schedule to the appropriate instance managers. Right. So first, we'll walk through a developer. Now, I'm a developer who is about to deploy a confidential service. This service is one that is a simple Node application. So as you'll see here, the primary code is in this telco secure.js, and there's a package.json. The Apcera platform, when you go and run this APC create command, is telling it to create a service with this name, and the -r is the route that it's going to be sending that it's going to allow requests to come in on. And once you go and create this service, it will go and start the service. One of the neat things about Apcera is, based on what you currently have inside of that directory, if it's a .js file with a package.json, it'll know to use our Node.js stager. And that Node.js stager will automatically create the OS, automatically add the runtimes that you have specified by policy in your environment. So it'll run with the appropriate version of Node, it'll run in an OS, all of that's automatically configured for you. Right. The other thing that I want to point out here is these binding environment variables that are running here, the JDBC, sorry, as this is printing out, but these JDBC MySQL URLs, these are injected into the environment because I've given a database connection to this particular service. So by binding this service to a database, I'm automatically given environment variables which have the connection information to that database. And this allows me to, through configuration in the Apcera platform, change exactly what database this application is talking to. Right? So now we'll see that our application is running. We can go and make a request to that application. And here you'll see this is your secure information. These are CDR records that came out of your system. These were accessed using an API key through the Apogee platform. All right, so here inside of Apogee, I've set up a target Apogee Edge gateway, this secure API proxy. And the secure API proxy then points to this target endpoint, and that's the target endpoint that I just enabled inside of the Apcera platform. So now any request to this endpoint will go to the service that I was able to just deploy. Now flipping back to our service, One of the other things that the Apcera platform allows you to do easily is to set up what's called a log drain. This log drain takes all of your standard out and standard error and pipes it to a syslog URL that you have declared. In this case, I'm running an Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana stack inside of the Apcera platform. So I'm just going to set up this log drain to now start making requests to that, to start sending all of my log files to that ELK stack. And now if I flip over to my Kibana UI, and sorry, first I need to make a request that will actually get logged in Kibana. See it there again. Okay, so now you'll see, because I set up this log drain, you'll see that because I set up this log drain, I'm now getting requests, all the requests that come to this SEC service that I just deployed in the Apcera platform will now show up in my Kibana dashboard. Now what I want to do is, you see this message ID here. This message ID, I'm using a feature of Apcera which allows me to take variables that are existing inside of the Apcera platform, or I'm sorry, a feature of the Apogee platform where I can have variables added to my request messages to enrich those requests that are coming to my backend services. These two fields, user.xuser and action.messageID, those are both fields that I've added to the Apogee platform, to my Apogee Edge gateway, to then send back to my system. What I want to be able to do is now tie the specific request that came from Apogee, the time that that request was made, to this specific service, so that I know for sure that any request that I'm receiving is a legitimate request that's coming through the Apogee platform and through the users that I've specified and allowed to give access to that Apogee platform. So to do that, what I'm going to do is, I've got a script here, and I'll show you the script. All right, so this script, the key, sorry, I'm waiting for the screen to refresh. Okay, so the key things to look at here is both Apogee and Apcera give you ability to make immense, basically everything you can do through the web UI, you can do through a command prompt as well. So in this case, I'm simply taking the current secure proxy information, the exact setup and configuration of that information, and I'm going and I'm updating two pieces of data inside of a message logging policy that I've added to Apogee, so that it points to the correct syslog host and port that I've now deployed in the Apcera system. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. All right, so this will just take a second. All right, so now it's updated my Apogee policy. And now when I go back to make a request to the service, and flip back to my Kibana dashboard, we'll see in 1 second here that we have both the Apogee job that received the request. So this is the Apogee Edge Gateway, the URL that the address of the secure API proxy and the specific revision of that proxy that was initially requested, and then the service that serviced that particular request. So if you were running multiple services here, you could see the name of each of those individual services, as well as the Apogee request that it came through. And one of the other things that you could do is, by using these message IDs and starting to tie together the fact that every request to each of these jobs should be through this Apogee gateway, you could start to monitor and alert and audit the fact that you didn't receive a Apogee request for this initial request, and ensure that that was not an attempted break-in or some other issue that caused a user to be able to access this data without coming through the Apogee gateway. Right. So that's a very simple example, and if we look over here at our development screen inside of the secure API proxy, I can show you where in the UI of Apogee you set the information about message logging. So you just simply need to add a new policy, and that policy has the configuration for the message that you want to send when you receive a request. You can do this both on the request and the response loop. So you could actually measure the full round trip or receive messages for the full round trip. And this is done essentially using standard syslog mechanisms. So the other point I want to make here is if you look at this specific app that I've deployed, this secure service application, you'll notice if I look at the networking for this, everything that's deployed into the Apcera platform is completely locked down by default. You need to specify everything that each of these individual applications can talk to. So in this case, this secure service can only talk to this database, which it has a service binding and a link to, and can only receive data from this route that has been specified on the job. A port is automatically selected. So when this is 0, a port is automatically produced, and your application then takes that automatic port generation and uses it to run your job. We have health checks that then monitor that port and will alert if the job stops running at any point in time, and also to know that the job has started successfully. So this allows you to, if you have jobs running on multiple ports, you can expose each of those individual ports, but nothing else, both either inside the Apcera system or external to the Apcera system, can access that job unless you give it explicit access by creating a route, opening up a port, or creating service bindings between those jobs.
So this is important, Peter, because essentially what we're starting with is an absolute zero trust staging environment, and then building up by way of explicitly declared policy who we trust and under what conditions, and what systems and protocols we trust, what routes, what bindings, etc., in order to shape the security policy that is appropriate for this type of data.
Exactly. So, our goal is to be able to do that while also giving your developers the flexibility to easily and simply release their code and their applications. So you can set up different rules in each of the individual namespaces so that you can do things like ensure that if you have a secure database service or a secure database running in, say, a development or a test environment, you may want to give developers direct access to that database, whereas in the production environment, you might only want their jobs to have read-only access to that database. So this allows us to set policies which constrain as you move from environment to environment, and most of that is done through the idea of namespacing. So everything that I'm currently running is done inside of my sandbox. So this sandbox, Peter Miron, which I have full control over. But if I were to try to do things in, say, a prod or a test namespace, I would not have access to be able to do that on this platform.
Just wanted to remind everyone that we will be doing some Q&A shortly. So if you have questions that are coming up on your mind or anything you'd like for us to walk through in a little bit more detail, please enter your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. It's very good, Peter. You know, the thing that I've learned the most after kind of working through this together is essentially with Apogee, you know, we've got that capability that I mentioned before of being able to drive API interactions with policy, injecting the right types of security, mediation, or traffic management policies all along the API request and response. And what we're talking about essentially adding is the same capabilities, but more with an infrastructure focus or a modern infrastructure focus on running microservices. And when you combine the two together and add in the fact that both platforms have an independent but equivalent mechanism for gathering real-time analytic data, and combine those two, essentially you truly have established that chain of custody that we were looking for.
Exactly. And to that end, this is a simple piece of demo code that I put together, which leverages both the Apigee and the Apcera APIs, and the fact that inside of Apcera, everything that you deploy, if you constrain it appropriately, essentially gives you a directed graph of all the participants in any single transaction. So what we're able to do is we're able to take that route that we've exposed on this SEC service and to the secure API proxy in Apigee, and to be able to connect those and start to pull auditing information of each of those individual services. So if you wanted to come in and say, for this API gateway, what are the services that are involved in that particular transaction, you would be able to see at any point in time exactly what services are connected to that route, as well as what other services are bound to the service that is producing that data. So this would allow you to see things like if, for instance, this secure database had external egress, or my secure service had some form of egress to another system, you'd be able to see that here, as well as you'd be able to see all of the jobs that are participating in that particular transaction.
So this really does satisfy. From a business perspective, all of the requirements that might be held by a CISO, a CIO, a CTO, a legal representative, or an external organization like a QSA for PCI compliance, or an external auditor, while also helping to manage the world of the IT operations professional that's charged with managing, monitoring, and dealing with the security concerns of an operating system all day long, right?
You got it.
Very powerful. All right, well, why don't we move into the Q&A a little bit, and I see a few questions coming in. Again, we're going to do our best to try and answer all of your questions here today, so please enter those into the Q&A tab if you have them. I see one here coming from Ron Raz at Kaltura. He's asking, what is the project phase that customers ideally should consider Apogee or solution architecture, more upstream or more downstream? You know, we actually get that question a lot, and our perspective is that in the digital world, the sooner that APIs are latched to that which exists today, the better that you are. Things on the back end don't have to be modernized in order to take advantage of the power and capabilities of the Apogee platform. In fact, the telco service that Peter was using in his demonstration here is actually a real live piece of working code that interacts with one of the world's largest telecommunications companies. That particular service is an older XML-based service, and we essentially reshaped it with APIs in a matter of minutes in order to conduct this demonstration, and then hooked it and ran it outside in Apcera in order to fulfill the requirements of the demonstration. So you don't have to have everything at all in perfect shape. You can be dealing with services that are 10, 15 years old. You can be dealing with stuff that's XML RPC or static web services that simply deliver a secured response. Really doesn't matter what you have today. As long as it speaks HTTP or HTTPS, Apogee can bind to it and provide some of these powerful capabilities at the API management layer. Right. We had a couple other questions. Are other logging tools, i.e. Splunk, supported? I noticed you were using Kibana. Yes, Kibana was just a simple choice. We could have very easily used Graylog, or we could have just catted the log files together within this particular environment ourselves on a terminal, but we just chose to use Kibana as an example. Splunk would be supported. You could use it in either syslog format, or you could stream data directly over a TCP port into Splunk. We've seen use cases of all of the above. In fact, most organizations already have a standardized, centralized logging environment for both TCP and normal data dumps from a variety of different systems. They're going for sort of a single screen experience, and we have capability to support all of the above. Peter, there's another one. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One last thing I'd add there is just From a developer tooling perspective, you can also simply tail log files on the Apcera platform directly from the command line as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Peter, this question came in. Perhaps you could answer this one. So does this guarantee that my data will not be compromised, or is it more of a way to see if a data breach has occurred?
Yeah, so there's no perfect way to ensure that your data is never breached or exposed. And my recommendation and the recommendation I've always received from the CISOs that I've worked with is that you really want to make sure that you have a defense in-depth approach to security. So the mechanisms that we used today are more for identifying that a breach may have occurred or that a breach could occur through known mechanisms. What you could do as well, though, is use similar approaches to what we did here today to take information from the Apcera platform and link it to information in the Apogee platform to do things like create custom keys, custom usernames and passwords for handling the requests between the Apogee platform and Apcera. So as we showed with updating the message log information, there's nothing that would really prevent you from putting things like JavaScript web tokens or even just more kind of simple usernames and passwords that you could enrich the requests coming from Apogee with, so that you could add an additional layer of security into the applications. But again, I think it really is a matter of trying to make sure that you can trace as much of the system and understand the system as well as possible. And where I think Apcera starts to shine is by being able to constrain exactly what containers can connect to each other, and by limiting things like egress, so that you don't have risk of problems like what we saw recently with the Krebs video camera DDoS, video camera-based DDoS attack, where you have these Linux machines running inside your environment somewhere that are doing something malicious, even if not to your personal data.
Very good. Very good. So we have another question from Adil Quresh from Univeris. He says, I noticed that there was a security layer associated with Apogee. How is this different from what Apcera provides? I suppose the simplest answer is that Apogee is going to cover and provide policies for managing all of the security concerns of the API itself. So things like authentication, authorization. If we can use OAuth policies inside of Apogee in order to manage various different keys and credentials that allow API access inside. We can also use API key security very easily within inside of Apogee to determine whether or not a request is appropriate at the Apogee layer. Once we get past the Apogee security policies, though, what we're most concerned with is the additional security capabilities of back-end systems. So organizations that use traditional ESB or SOA environments may have some type of an existing common store, typically an LDAP or a federated identity management provider. There's a need to be able to interact with those. And then with microservices, they may have their own independent security approach as well, such as a common identity and access service. So really, Apcera is intended to govern the security, if I'm right, Peter, and please feel free to chime in on this. Apcera is really intended to govern the security and the various different aspects of the back-end service as it's running within the Apcera runtime or outside of it, and then place security governance and controls on what it can or cannot communicate with. Did I get that right?
Exactly. So from my perspective, the Apogee platform is very complementary in how it allows you to deal with and manage external developer access to your APIs, where Apcera is really focused is your internal development team and your internal developers and how they release and deploy software and how those services can connect internally. Apogee offers a wide variety of features that make it easier to manage the keys and manage that life cycle, as well as offers additional features for for helping managing things like rate limiting and other types of requests from the outside world that the Apcera platform doesn't provide out of the box.
Great. We have another question from Riaz Mohammed at Levi Strauss & Company, and he's asking, how does the license model work with Apcera? If I already have a license for Apogee, do we need to consider purchasing Apcera?
Yes, so the Apcera purchase would be a separate licensing, and at this point, Paul, I don't know if you're still on the call as well, but we really want to make sure that we're providing value to our clients. So we work closely with each of our clients to determine exactly what that licensing model looks like and how it's going to work best for you. So my recommendation would be to reach out to me, and I can connect you with the right folks on our sales team to be able to help you get the answers to that question, Riaz.
Great. And Ron Raz from Kaltura asks, can you explain the distinction between the Apogee and AWS API gateway? Any major overlap? Yeah. So this is a bit of a competitive question, and we typically don't get into direct competitive discussions about other organizations. What I can tell you is that from an Apogee perspective, we're looking at the entire digital value chain, as I had depicted before in one of the earlier slides. So we're looking at consumption and exposure of APIs and everything in between across what we call the API lifecycle. So other gateway technology might provide you with an immediate capability to do some basic things like rate limiting and API key validation. The challenge is that when you get past some of those initial requirements, when you're deploying your API program, you will find that you need a lot of additional capabilities in order to fulfill on the promise of moving towards a digital world. What Apogee is really designed to is to cover the superset of all of those things that our customers, our partners, and the analyst community have shared with us over many years and hundreds of different engagements that they ultimately encounter. So the concern with other products is that they've only taken it to a certain extent, and the reality of the situation is that a full approach that is comprehensive in nature to API management is what is required. Further, the last thing I'll say about this is when you look at what we're really doing here, it's the marriage of not just API management and container and runtime environments. We're also looking at a very important marriage between real-time end-to-end analytics and pulling all of those together so that we get that true view, single screen visibility into that chain of custody. That's just simply not possible with other products that don't expose a full API-based approach towards gathering real-time analytics. So those would be my comments on that particular question, and thank you very much for asking. So we have one also from Anton von Wonsel from Accenture. I hope I got that right. Can you add an additional authentication to the secure API proxy independent from API gateway authentication? Absolutely, you can. In fact, we provide a series of extension policies that are built into Apogee. So if there is a binding for your independent API authentication mechanism that you'd like to use that's not supported by either three-legged OAuth or a SAML-based policy, you can actually use Node.js, Python, JavaScript, or Java to connect into whatever mechanism that you're interested in using from within Apogee. And then once you have achieved a 200 OK or whatever status response you're looking for, along with the appropriate access credentials that are necessary to complete the exchange, that can then be passed from a variable in Apogee to the other participating backend systems. That's actually a common use case that we see quite a bit. More often we see OAuth to SAML, and we call that a credential mediation use case. So you might place API key-based security and OAuth security on the front end, and then on the back end of an API call, interact with a third-party product or subsystem for additional authentication and control. Next one is from Hassan Kurt from ABN AMRO Bank. How does Apcera stand in relation with products like Ping Federation? I'm assuming that you're talking about Ping Identity and the federated approach they've taken to identity management. Peter, you want to take a stab at that one?
So I'm actually not familiar with Ping Federation, so I need to do a little research and get back to Hassan.
Great, great. Hassan, thanks for asking the question. We will definitely follow up directly with you. Got another one here. Someone is asking, which application types can I deploy into Apcera? Is it just Java and Node? I noticed that those were the ones that Peter was talking about earlier. Peter, can you talk a little bit about the language coverage of the Apcera platform?
Yeah, so Apcera has runtimes out of the box for PHP, Node, Java, Perl, Python, and there are also ways to deploy essentially a Ubuntu container, which you can then kind of fill with other C applications. So really, any of your standard applications and programming languages, from your standard Unix languages to also being able to deploy some .NET languages, are available in the Apcera platform.
Great. How do I get started? Who should I contact to dive into this deeper? So Peter, you want to talk a little bit about Apcera?
Sure. So I just put up the slide regarding both of our free trials. So we at Apcera have a community edition that is available for free. You can use it as much as you want. It doesn't have as many features as our enterprise edition, but it'll give you a great understanding of your overall development and operations workflows inside of the Apcera platform, and allow you to run it either locally on a virtual machine on your local desktop, or deploy it to AWS to get a sense for how Apcera works. And again, you can use it as much as you want. And then you can contact us if you would like a better understanding of what's available in our Enterprise Edition. So that's a great way to get started with Apcera.
Likewise, for Apogee, you can go to apogee.com today and try out everything that we've shown you today and much, much more with our free offering. We have a variety of different product levels that you can subscribe to, but the free is always available. Our documentation, by the way, is completely online, and it is connected with our community that I mentioned before. So a couple of URLs, you can either find these in the apogee.com UI, but you can go to docs.apogee.com, and all of our product documentation is in the open and online, indexed and searchable. We also index and correlate directly to community.apogee.com, where thousands of people like yourself who are interested in APIs are asking questions and getting them answered every single day. So it's a wonderful collective, and we would encourage you to join the community. But definitely get started with Apogee Edge trial. It's a really great opportunity for you to try out Apogee and all of the different policy-based approaches that we have. Great. So just a little bit about one upcoming event. We're wrapping up in terms of time for today. But Apogee is conducting our world tour, our Adapt or Die world tour, where we're specializing in providing organizations like yours with digital know-how. We just conducted the San Francisco event last week. New York is coming up next week, and then subsequently we have Chicago, Sydney, and London. So hopefully there's an event that you can attend that is near where you are, and we would love to see you. So please register at adapt.apogee.com. Really appreciate everyone's time today. We'd like to, again, thank you for your attendance, and thank you for all of your questions. And for any that have been unanswered, we will directly connect with you afterward. via email. Peter, great partnership. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.